In a quiet coastal town where winter snow buried even the warmest memories, they made the decision to put down the K-9 once hailed as the pride of the force. Ranger now carried only one label, Uncontrollable. But just as the order was signed, a blind girl walked in. With a single soft word, she brought the most feared dog in the department to his knees, leaving every officer frozen in disbelief. No one could have imagined that moment would rewrite the fate everyone thought was already sealed. The sound came first. Not the bark everyone expected from a police dog, but a raw, ragged screech of metal and fury. The chain-link panels of the K-9 run rattled so hard the bolts screamed in protest. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as a German shepherd hurled himself at the fencing again. Teeth flashed, paws slamming the gate like he wanted to tear the whole room apart. "Back up! Back up!" one of the younger officers shouted, stumbling away as the dog hit the fence hard enough to shake the concrete floor. The dog's name was Ranger. Once that name had meant something in Harbor Point, Maine. It showed up in local news stories, in framed photos on the station's hallway walls, in proud little plaques the city council liked to point at during tours. Now it was written on a red folder, stamped in block letters. Risk. Ranger lunged again, claws scraping, saliva flying from his bared teeth. His eyes, a dark burning amber, locked onto anyone who moved. The air in the training hall smelled faintly of bleach, rubber mats, and fear. At the far end of the room, Chief Daniels watched with his jaw clenched. He was a big man, shoulders rounded from too many years in the job, hair gone thin and gray at the temples. The lines around his mouth were deeper these days. He folded his arms, hiding the tremor in his hands. "Turner would hate this," he muttered, almost to himself. Beside him, Councilman Richard Hayes didn't even pretend to look sentimental. He stood in his neatly pressed suit, an overcoat draped across one arm despite the warmth inside, eyes narrowed behind thin-framed glasses. If fear had a different smell, it was the cold, sharp tang of politics in his cologne. "Sentiment isn't going to keep us out of court, Chief," Hayes said. "You saw the report. 2 trainers injured, 1 officer with 20 stitches and a nerve injury. The union is already watching this. So are the lawyers." On the other side of the glass partition, Ranger spun in a tight circle, hackles raised, then drove himself at the gate again. The heavy latch jumped in its housing with a dull clang. Trung C. Mark Evans stood closer to the kennel than anyone else dared. His body was angled sideways, not out of fear, but out of habit, like someone who had spent years letting dogs read his posture before they read his voice. He held his hands low and still, eyes steady on Ranger. "Easy, boy," Mark said quietly. "That's enough." For a heartbeat, the dog's ears flicked toward him. The growl dipped, almost faltered. Then Ranger's gaze snagged on the reflection of another officer moving behind the glass, and the rage surged back like a wave. He lunged, teeth smashing against the fence, snarling so hard it sounded like something tearing inside his chest. Dr. Emily Ward, the behavior specialist, scribbled something on her clipboard. She had her hair twisted up in a messy knot, glasses slipping down her nose, and the kind of steady expression of someone who'd seen too many badly wired brains, human and canine. "His arousal level is past anything you can redirect right now," she said. "He's not hearing you, Sergeant. He's not hearing anyone." The station's vet, Dr. Morales, shifted his weight, eyes flicking from the dog to the chief. "That last bite went through the bite sleeve, Chief. It wasn't a warning snap. He meant it." Mark didn't look away from Ranger. "He meant something," he said. "Doesn't mean what you think it does." Hayes let out a short, humorless laugh. "What I think it means," he said, "is that we have an animal on city property that's one incident away from ending up on the evening news. Uncontrollable K-9 Mall citizen. You want that headline?" Ranger flung himself at the corner panel, claws screeching against the metal. One of the younger officers swore under his breath and stepped farther back. Chief Daniels rubbed a hand over his face and finally tore his eyes away from the kennel. The group drifted toward the small office off to the side of the training hall, the door closing behind them with a heavy click that muffled the worst of the noise. The office was cramped, the blinds half closed against the pale winter light. A worn wooden table sat in the middle of the room, coffee rings staining its surface, a stack of manila folders fanned out like a losing hand of cards. On top of the pile lay one folder, thicker than the rest. Ranger. Incident log. Hayes flipped it open with 2 fingers, as if the paper itself might bite. Attacked Trainer Lowell during a simple heel exercise, he read. No provocation, no external trigger, no loud noise. Lowell needed 9 stitches. 2 weeks later, lunged at Officer Kincaid in the hallway. This time he went for the arm, and didn't let go. Kincaid still can't close his hand all the way. He looked up. You want me to explain to his wife that we're giving the dog another chance? Mark took a slow breath, the kind that had gotten him through more funerals than he liked to count. He's not some random stray off the street, he said. Ranger has more fines on record than any dog we've ever had. He's pulled lost kids out of the woods. He's tracked down stroke patients who wandered from the nursing home. He saved lives, a lot more than any of us around this table. And now he's dangerous, Hayes shot back. Whatever he was, then doesn't. Change what he is now. Dr. Emily didn't jump in right away. She flipped back through her notes, tapped the pen against the margin, then spoke in her calm, even tone. He's not rabid. He's not neurologically degenerative. What I'm seeing is a trauma response that's been left to rot. Overload, hypervigilance, misdirected aggression. His whole world changed when Turner died, and nobody gave him a new one to live in. Hayes rolled his eyes. With all due respect, Doctor, you may speak fluent psychology, but the city speaks liability. We can't have a loaded gun with fur walking around here. Chief Daniels stared at the tabletop for a long moment. The ticking wall clock counted out the silence between them. Outside the office door, Ranger's furious howls rose and fell like distant thunder. The board reviewed the last evaluation, Daniels said finally. His voice sounded older than it had an hour ago. You all know what they recommended. Dr. Morales pushed a single piece of paper toward the center of the table. It was crisp, freshly printed, the ink still dark. At the top, in clean, clinical font, were a few lines that made Mark's stomach twist. Euthanasia. Authorization. Subject, K-9 Ranger. The room felt smaller all of a sudden, the air heavy. Mark's eyes fixed on the word like it was written in another language. No, he said automatically. It came out too loud, too sharp. He forced his tone down. Chief, this is too fast. We haven't exhausted options. A different handler. A different environment. Time. Hayes snorted. Time we don't have? Money we don't have. He's flunked out of 3 separate reevaluations. No one can handle him. No one wants to. The insurance rep flat out told us, keep him, and we're on our own if anything else happens. Daniels's gaze slid to Mark. There was regret in it, and something that looked very much like apology. You think I like this? The chief asked quietly. I was there the day he made that first find in the snowstorm. I know what he's done, but I have officers scared to walk past the K-9 wing. I have a community that trusts us to protect them, not keep a ticking bomb in the back room because we can't let go of the past. Mark looked at Dr. Emily, hoping for backup. She met his eyes, then dropped hers to the paper. I won't lie to you, she said softly. I think he's treatable, but not quickly, not cheaply, and not without risk. You're not being handed a, yes, he'll be fine option here. You're being handed a, maybe, if everything goes right, in a world where things usually don't. The pen waited near the bottom of the page, a small ordinary thing that suddenly seemed a lot heavier than it should. Hayes lifted it and tapped the line. "We schedule it 3 days from now," he said. "Gives everyone time to process, do whatever you need to do, but dragging this out for weeks or months, that's not happening." Daniels took the pen from him. His hand hovered over the form. Mark felt his pulse pounding in his neck. "Chief," Mark said, leaning forward, "he's not a piece of equipment. He's a working officer. He doesn't understand why his world blew apart. You can't punish him for losing the only person he trusted." Daniels's eyes flicked up, glistening for just a second. "And I can't risk another officer getting torn open because we're all too sentimental," he said. "We owe them more than that, too." He signed his name in a slow, careful scrawl. The sound of the pen scratching across paper seemed louder than Ranger's howling. Dr. Morales added his signature, then Hayes, quick and efficient. When the form slid toward Mark, there was a blank line with his name typed underneath. He stared at it. His hand didn't move. "You don't have to sign," Daniel said quietly. "It's not mandatory." "That's good," Mark answered, just as quietly. He pushed the paper gently back toward the chief. "Because I can't." For a moment, something like relief flickered over Daniel's face, as if he'd been hoping for exactly that much resistance, one small refusal to pretend this was normal. "We're set, then," Hayes said briskly, standing, already straightening his tie. 3 days. Have the dog transferred to the medical wing the morning of. Keep him contained until then. No visitors. No exceptions." The meeting broke apart in low murmurs and the scrape of chairs. Hayes walked out first, his footsteps echoing down the hall. Dr. Morales followed, shoulders slumped. Dr. Emily lingered for a heartbeat longer, resting a hand on Mark's arm. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know what he meant to you guys." "He still means it," Mark replied. "That's the problem." When Mark stepped back into the training hall, the barking had stopped. For a second, his heart jumped into his throat. Silence from a dog like Ranger was its own kind of alarm. He walked toward the runs, boots thudding on the concrete. The closer he got, the more he could hear it. Not silence exactly, but a low, steady sound. A roughened breath. A faint whine, so soft it was almost shameful. Ranger wasn't at the gate anymore. He lay in the back of the kennel, head between his paws, chest rising and falling in shallow, exhausted waves. The fur along his spine was still raised, but the fury in his eyes had burned down to something darker. Older. Mark stepped as close as he dared, fingers curling around the cool metal of the fence. "You heard them, didn't you?" he murmured. "You don't know the words, but you feel it. Doors closing, people giving up." Ranger's ear twitched, his eyes lifted, meeting Mark's through the mesh. For a fleeting second, the animal's gaze looked almost human. Not crazed, not wild, just lost. Someone at the far end of the hall opened another kennel, the hinges squealing. Ranger flinched, then forced himself back to his feet, the chain on his collar rattling as he paced once, twice, then hit the gate again out of sheer habit, as if rage was the only thing he had left to wear. "Come on, big guy," one of the kennel officers called, voice strained. "Time to move you to the isolation run." It took 3 men and a control pole to get Ranger out. He fought them, snarling, snapping at the pole, twisting his body with a desperate strength that came from some place that had nothing to do with muscle. His paws slipped on the concrete, claws scrabbling, the leash taut as a wire. But when they dragged him past Mark, for just a heartbeat, the dog's head turned. The snarl faded. Those dark eyes met Mark's again, wide and shining with something that was not anger at all. Fear. Then the moment was gone. Ranger was hauled down the hallway, his body a storm on 4 legs, noise echoing off the cinder block walls. Mark stood there, alone in the humming silence that followed, the signed order burning a hole in his mind. 3 days, he thought, 3 days until Harbor Point put down its uncontrollable K-9. And 3 days for someone, somehow, to find a reason not to. The snow had come early that year, drifting across the Harbor Point Bridge in slow, stubborn sheets that clung to the rails and blurred the lines of the roadway. Folks still talked about that night the way older men talked about the war, quiet, tense, as if speaking too loud might wake the ghosts hiding in the story. And at the center of it all was Ranger, long before anyone called him Uncontrollable. Back then, he was the pride of the department, strong, focused, quick to follow a command the moment it left Officer Jake Turner's mouth. The two of them moved like they shared a single heartbeat. When Jake walked, Ranger paced beside him. When Jake laughed, Ranger's tail swept the floor like a broom. The older officers joked that they'd never seen a dog and a man so welded together. But beneath the jokes was a bone-deep respect. Everyone knew they could count on those two when things went bad. And things went bad on a bitter night in February. A call came in just after dusk. A family car had spun out on the bridge, skidding into a half-collapsed guardrail. The dispatcher's voice trembled as she read the details. Possible entrapment, heavy smoke, occupants still inside. Jake didn't wait for anyone else to volunteer. He clipped Ranger's vest, slapped the release on the kennel door, and they were in the cruiser before the others had even grabbed their coats. Wind tore across the bridge when they arrived, howling like it had teeth. Patrol lights flashed red and blue across the twisted hulk of the family sedan. One wheel dangled over the edge, spinning helplessly above the frozen river. Smoke poured from the engine bay, carried sideways in long streaks of gray. A woman stood on the shoulder, screaming for her little girl. Fire crews were still minutes away. Jake didn't hesitate. He looked at Ranger, touched the dog's head once, and said, "We go together." Ranger barked once, sharp, certain, and lunged forward, claws scraping on the icy pavement as they ran toward the wreck. The front doors were jammed, metal folded in on itself like tinfoil. Jake smashed a rear window with his baton, reached inside, and felt a small, trembling hand latch onto him. A little girl, maybe 4 or 5, face streaked with soot and tears, arms rigid with fear. Ranger pushed in beside Jake, shoving his head under the falling glass, shielding the child from every shard. It was instinct, not training. Every firefighter who later reviewed the scene agreed on that. "Got you?" Jake murmured, pulling her free. "You're okay, sweetheart." But the girl didn't answer him. She buried her face in Ranger's neck, sobbing the same 2 words over and over again against his fur. "Thank you. Thank you." Her fingers clung to his collar like it was the only solid thing in her world. Ranger didn't move, didn't flinch. He braced himself, taking her weight with the kind of patience only the gentlest dogs ever learn. And in the middle of all that chaos and noise, there was something almost peaceful in the way he held still for her. Jake carried the girl toward the first cruiser arriving behind them. The bridge lights flickered against the rising smoke. A strange quiet settled for one split second, a stillness that felt wrong. Ranger felt it first. His body stiffened, his ears twitched. The growl began low in his chest. Jake turned back toward the car. He didn't have time to do anything else. The sedan exploded. A ripple of fire tore across the bridge, roaring louder than the wind. The shock wave threw Jake backward, slamming him onto the pavement. Ranger was tossed into the barrier, yelping as he hit. Burning debris rained across the roadway. Officers ducked, shields raised. The heat washed over them all like someone had opened the door of an oven. Ranger scrambled to his feet first. He shook the soot from his fur, then sprinted straight toward Jake through the smoke, ignoring the shouts to stay back. When he reached his handler, he pressed his body against Jake's chest, whining, nudging, doing everything he could to push life back into the man who'd trusted him with everything. But Jake Turner was no longer breathing. The paramedics tried. God knows they tried. But Ranger didn't understand death, only loss, and loss was a thing that hollowed him out on the spot. Officers had to drag him away because he would not leave Jake's side. He fought the leash, teeth clamped down, muscles shaking with panic. One firefighter swore he heard the dog let out a sound he would never forget, not a bark, not a growl, but a broken, grieving howl that cut straight through bone. After that night, Ranger never truly came back. He stopped sleeping through the night, stopped responding to normal cues. He paced endlessly, snapping at noises no one else heard. His eyes changed first, growing darker, distant, as if part of him had stayed on that bridge with the man who died saving a family. Mark saw it. Daniel saw it. The whole department saw it. Somewhere in those first few weeks, Ranger went from a hero to a liability, not because he wanted to hurt anyone, but because he'd lost the one person who told him what the world meant. Without Jake, everything felt wrong to him. Every hallway, every voice, every hand that reached toward him. And no one, not even the best trainers, could fill the hole in the dog's chest. Now, months later, watching Ranger fighting 3 grown officers just to be moved from one kennel to another, Mark couldn't shake the memory of that little girl on the bridge, clinging to Ranger's fur in the middle of smoke and fire. He wondered if Ranger remembered her too. He wondered if some part of the dog was still standing there on that bridge, hearing a tiny voice whisper, "Thank you," through the flames. He wondered if that final thread, fragile, buried, forgotten, was the only thing left that might pull Ranger back from the edge before the 3 days ran out. And for the first time since the euthanasia order was signed, Mark didn't feel only fear or anger. He felt a spark of something else. Possibility. The Harbor Point station felt different on the mornings when Tom Carter came by to service the alarm system. The place always quieted a little, out of respect more than anything. Tom had spent 30 years running into burning buildings while other people were running out. His knees were worn, his shoulders stiff, but he still walked with the steady confidence of a man who had pulled strangers out of smoke and learned not to brag about it. That morning, he had his granddaughter with him. Lily Carter moved beside him with the soft tap-tap of her white cane brushing the tile. 11 years old, slight as a bird, a blue winter hat pulled down over her dark hair. She didn't walk hesitantly the way adults expected a blind child to walk. She walked like someone who had memorized the shape of life through her ears alone. Every small sound told her a story. The squeak of boots, the rustle of paperwork, the hum of the soda machine, the quiet sigh of a tired officer leaning against the wall. "Stay close, sweetheart," Tom murmured, resting a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I am," she answered, smiling faintly. "I can hear everything today." She always said it like that, as if hearing everything was a gift, not a circumstance life shoved at her after the accident years ago. Tom wished she hadn't lost her sight so young, wished she hadn't had to learn how to read a room by breathing in its sadness. But Lily never complained. Sometimes she even seemed to understand people better than they understood themselves. They reached the front desk and were greeted by Dispatch Officer Marilyn Jacobs, a grandmotherly woman who always saved a peppermint candy for Lily. "There's my favorite visitor," Marilyn said warmly. Lily laughed softly. "You only say that because I don't eat all your peppermints." Tom chuckled. "She's not wrong." As the 2 adults talked, Lily tilted her head. The steady rhythm of the station, phones, printers, distant chatter, was broken by a sound she didn't quite recognize. A low vibration, sharp at the edges, traveling through the floor before it touched the air. She felt it in her ribs. "What's that noise?" she asked quietly. Tom paused. "What noise, honey?" "That rumbling," she whispered. "It's scared?" Marilyn raised her brows. "Scared? Sweetheart, this is a police station. There are lots of noises." But Lily didn't move. She turned slightly, as if following the sound through the hallway with her face instead of her feet. "It's coming from somewhere in the back," she murmured. "Something's pacing. And the breathing. It's fast. like when people try not to cry. Tom looked toward the hallway leading to the K-9 wing. A shadow crossed his expression. "That would be Ranger," he said quietly. "Ranger?" "A police dog," Marilyn explained gently. "He's having a hard time." Lily frowned. "The angry one?" Tom hesitated. "People say he's dangerous now." Lily shook her head, slow and certain. "No, not dangerous. Hurting?" Before either adult could answer, Ranger's snarl exploded through the hallway, loud, sharp, echoing off the cinder-block walls. Officers stiffened. A radio fell silent mid-sentence. Somewhere in the K-9 wing, boots scuffed against concrete as someone shouted, "Get him under control!" Marilyn reached for Lily's shoulder. "Let's step away from that hall, sweetheart." But Lily didn't step away. She stepped closer, just one pace, but enough to make Tom's breath catch. "Lily," he warned, "that dog isn't safe." She didn't argue with him. She didn't argue with anyone. She simply stood still, listening. Truly listening. Ranger's rage filled the hallway in crashing waves, metal clanging, claws scraping. But beneath the violence was something else. A thin, trembling note humans weren't built to notice. Fear, not the kind that lashes out, but the kind that shivers. She whispered more to herself than anyone else. Someone should help him. Tom's heart squeezed in his chest. He guided her gently away. "Come on, sweetheart. That's not a job for us." But Mark Evans rounded the corner just in time to hear Lily's soft sentence. He had been heading back from the isolation wing, exhausted from wrestling Ranger into a secured run. His sleeves were damp with sweat, his hair disheveled. He wasn't expecting to see a blind child standing in the hallway outside the K-9 wing. He wasn't expecting to hear her say what no one else had dared to believe. "Help him," Mark repeated under his breath. Lily turned, her face toward the sound of his voice. "You're an officer, right?" "Yes, ma'am," Mark said, surprised by how steady his voice came out. "Then why does he sound so sad?" Mark froze. The question was so simple, but it slipped between his ribs like a blade. No one, not the behavior specialist, not the chief, not the trainers, had used that word. Sad. They called Ranger unstable, dangerous, unfit. But sad, that took a different kind of seeing. Ranger's claws raked against metal again, and Lily flinched, but only for a breath. "Does he have anyone?" she asked. Mark swallowed. "He used to." That answer seemed to hit Lily somewhere deep. She nodded once, as if she understood something adults had been missing for months. Something quiet, something emotional, something true. Tom placed his hand on her back again. "Lily, come on now. Officer Evans has work to do." Lily lowered her head a little, but the words were still forming behind her lips. Mark saw it, felt it like a shift in the room's temperature. She wasn't done. "Sir?" she said softly. "Yes?" "Does he know people haven't given up on him?" Mark blinked hard. His throat tightened before he could stop it. "No," he said honestly. "I don't think he knows that." The moment stretched, suspended, as if the entire station was holding its breath. Then Ranger let out a sound so strange, so raw, it made every officer turn toward the hallway. It wasn't a bark, it wasn't a threat. It was a wounded moan. Tom gently guided Lily toward the stairs. Mark watched them go, a quiet ache spreading through him. He didn't know if Lily Carter was a blessing, a warning, or something else entirely, but something in him whispered that the dog in the isolation run had felt her presence the same way he had, like the first crack of sunlight under a locked door. Long after they disappeared from sight, Mark stood alone in the hallway, listening to Ranger's breathing settle, just barely, like a storm losing a little of its strength. And for the first time since Turner died, Mark wondered if help for Ranger might come from someone no one would have ever expected. A blind girl who heard pain long before others saw it. The next morning, the sky over Harbor Point was the color of dirty dishwater, low clouds pressing down on the town like a weight. Inside the station, the air felt just as heavy. People spoke in quieter tones. Laughter, the kind that sometimes floated out of the break room, was nowhere to be heard. Word had gotten around. Not everyone had seen the euthanasia form, but enough whispers had traveled from desk to desk. They finally scheduled it. 3 days. About time. Damn shame. Every opinion had a voice. None of them mattered as much as the signatures on that one sheet of paper. Chief Daniels stood at the head of the small conference room again, one hand braced on the table as if he needed help holding himself up. The blinds were drawn this time. The fluorescent light hummed overhead, casting a pale glow over tired faces. "Let's make this quick," he said. "We've got patrol schedules to set and 15 open calls pending. But we owe it to everyone to talk this through one more time." Mark sat halfway down the table, shoulders stiff, coffee untouched in front of him. Across from him, Councilman Hayes had his tablet out, scrolling through his notes, lips pressed into a thin, satisfied line. Dr. Emily Ward sat at the far end, legal pad in front of her, pen motionless for once. Daniels tapped the stack of papers in front of him. "Behavioral assessments, incident reports, medical notes. You've all had a chance to review them." "We've been reviewing them for months," Hayes cut in. "All the more reason to stop pretending there's a different answer hiding in there. The dog is a danger." "Ranger is a working officer," Mark said. He didn't raise his voice, but the words had an edge. "He deserves better than being summarized in a bullet point." Hayes spread his hands. "His status as an officer is exactly why this is so serious, Sergeant. An unstable house pet is one thing. An unstable K-9 is a lawsuit with a badge on it." Daniels shot him a warning look, but he didn't disagree. Dr. Emily cleared her throat. "What he is traumatized," she said. "Every evaluation I've done points the same direction. Glassy stare, hypervigilance, exaggerated startle response. His aggression is rooted in fear, not dominance. If he were a human veteran, we'd be talking about PTSD." "We're not talking about a human veteran," Hayes replied. "We're talking about an animal with a jaw strong enough to crush bone." "Who's saved more lives than he's put at risk?" Mark snapped. The room fell quiet. Daniels let the silence hang for a beat before stepping in. "Let's not turn this into a shouting match," he said. His gaze found Mark's. "No one is questioning what Ranger has done for this town, but we have to face what he's doing now." He slid one photo out from the file. The bruise on Officer Kincaid's arm was ugly, purple and yellow, with angry puncture wounds where teeth had gone deeper than any padded sleeve could fully stop. "Kincaid still can't grip a steering wheel properly," Daniels said softly. "He wakes up at night with his arm on fire. He loves that dog, still does. But he asked me straight out if we're waiting for anyone else to end up in the ER before we act." Mark's jaw tightened. He remembered the shame in Kincaid's eyes when he'd said it, like he'd betrayed a friend by being afraid. Hayes smelled the opening. "The city has been more than patient," he said. "We've funded extra sessions with Dr. Ward, new equipment, reinforced kennels. At some point, this stops being rehab and starts being negligence. We are there, Chief." Emily's pen finally moved, a slow line across the page. "You're not wrong about the risk," she admitted. "I wish you were, but I also know what cases like his look like given time and the right connection." Hayes blinked. "The right what?" "Connection," she repeated. "Trauma dogs don't heal from commands. They heal from trust. That takes a person they can anchor to. He hasn't had that since Turner died." "Turner is gone," Hayes said flatly. "We can't resurrect him for the dog's sake." "No," Emily said quietly. But we can stop acting like Ranger is a broken tool instead of a grieving partner. Daniels closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, they shone with frustration and grief. And if we try again? If we drag this out for another 6 months and he puts someone in the hospital, what do I tell their family? We thought love might fix it? Emily didn't answer. Sometimes there was nothing to say. Daniels exhaled slowly. The order stands, he said. 3 days. He's to stay in the isolation run until then. Limited contact. Only handlers who know his history. Hayes nodded, victorious. Good. The city will back that decision. I didn't sign it, Mark said suddenly. Hayes gave a short laugh. No one needs your signature to make this binding, Sergeant. I know. Mark's eyes were level. I just wanted on the record that not everyone at this table agreed to call him a lost cause. Daniel's gaze softened. Duly noted, he said. We're done here. Chairs scraped back, files were gathered. Hayes slipped his tablet into his leather briefcase, already shifting his mind to the next meeting, the next budget, the next political fire to put out. Outside the conference room, the station's normal noise resumed, but under it all, there was that same tension. People kept their voices down without thinking about why. They stepped around the topic of Ranger like it was a stain on the floor they hoped would just fade on its own. Downstairs, in the lobby, Lily sat on a wooden bench beside her grandfather, fingers tracing the grain in the armrest. She couldn't see the door to the conference room, but she didn't need to. She could hear the difference between people walking out tired and walking out defeated. Tom checked his watch. Shouldn't be much longer, he said. They're just in a meeting. Lily nodded, but her head was tilted, listening. Through the layers of floor and wall, she could hear a muffled roar now and then. Ranger, throwing himself at the limits of his tiny world. Even that sound had changed since the day before. Less wild, more desperate. The conference room door finally opened. Footsteps moved past, quick, purposeful steps, one set louder and more annoyed than the rest. She caught a whiff of sharp cologne and leather. Whoever that belonged to didn't stay long. A door closer to the entrance swung open and shut. Out into the world he went. Another set of footsteps. Approached more slowly. Heavy boots, no rush, no bounce. Tired, but careful. She recognized that gait. The officer from yesterday. "Morning, Sergeant Evans," Tom said. "Morning, Tom," Mark replied. "Hey there, Lily." She turned her face toward his voice. "Hi." Something in his tone told her more than his words did. There was gravel in it that hadn't been there the day before. She folded her hands in her lap. "Did they talk about him?" she asked. Tom gave her a gentle nudge. "Lily." "It's okay," Mark said. He lowered himself onto the bench across from her, the vinyl creaking. "Yeah, we talked about him." "What did they say?" Her voice was small, but it didn't shake. There were a dozen ways he could have ducked the question. He could have said, "It's complicated," or "That's grown-up stuff," or "Don't worry about it." But he was looking at a child who had already lost her sight and had still found a way to stand in front of a snarling dog without flinching. "They're planning to put him down," he said quietly. 3 days from now." Tom winced. "Evans." "She asked," Mark replied without taking his eyes off Lily. For a long moment, she didn't speak. The sounds of the station filled the space instead. A phone ringing, a printer starting up, a distant radio chirping with static. Then Lily's throat worked, like she had to swallow something hard. "But you said he used to save people," she whispered. "You said he was a hero." "He was," Mark said. "Then why?" she asked, each word careful and clear. "Do you talk about him like trash now?" The question landed like a slap, not because of the tone, there was no anger in it, but because it was so honest. Tom opened his mouth to scold her, but the words died on his tongue when he saw Mark's face. He didn't bristle. He didn't snap back. He just sat there for a second, the muscle in his jaw tightening, his eyes turning glassy at the edges. "I don't," he said finally, his voice low. "At least I'm trying not to, but some folks do, and some talk about him like he's just a problem to get rid of. That's true." "Is he bad?" Lily asked. Mark shook his head before he remembered she couldn't see it. "No," he said firmly. "He's not bad. He's lost and scared, and so worn out from missing someone that he doesn't know what to do with the hurt anymore. When dogs get like that, it comes out their teeth instead of their words." Lily's fingers tightened around the handle of her cane. "Does he know?" she said softly. "Know what?" Mark asked. "That people gave up on him." The words slid into the old wounds in Mark's chest, the ones he'd tried to patch over with duty and procedure. He thought of the signed form, of the way Ranger's eyes had looked through the fence, of the trembling he'd felt in the leash that morning. "I think he feels it," he admitted, "even if he doesn't understand it." Lily nodded once, more to herself than anyone else, as if that answer matched something she'd already suspected. Somewhere down the hallway, Ranger barked again, the sound ragged, scraping. "He sounds like people who cry where nobody can see," she said. Tom put an arm around her shoulders. "Sweetheart, you don't need to worry about that dog. They know what they're doing." Lily didn't argue, but Mark watched her face, the way her brows drew together, the way her head tilted as she turned toward the direction of the K-9 wing. She might not have had eyes that worked, but everything else in her was wide open. Mark stood slowly. "I've got to get back," he said. "Tom, if you're heading downstairs, make sure you avoid the back hall. They're moving some gear through." "Will do," Tom said. "Sergeant?" Lily's voice stopped him. He looked back. "Yeah?" "If he could hear you," she said, "what would you tell him?" He thought about it, about all the things he wanted to say to a dog who had stood on a burning bridge and refused to leave his handler's side, about the anger, the guilt, the helpless respect. "I'd tell him I'm sorry," Mark said softly. "Sorry we don't know how to help him. Sorry we failed him. And that I haven't given up. Not yet." Lily's expression softened. "Maybe he needs to hear something else," she murmured. "What's that?" he asked. She shook her head slightly. "I don't know yet." But in the back of her mind, a memory stirred, just a vague sensation, heat and noise and the smell of smoke and a feeling of hands and fur and a word she couldn't quite reach. For now, she only knew one thing. Whatever everyone else planned to do to the uncontrollable K-9, she wasn't ready to talk about him like trash. Not when he sounded so much like someone who'd already lost everything once. The snow outside had started to fall again by the time Tom finished checking the fire panel on the second floor. He wiped his hands on an old shop rag and glanced down the hall where Lily stood waiting, her cane resting lightly in her hand. She wasn't humming today the way she often did in new buildings. She was listening again, listening the same way she had yesterday, the same way that made Tom more nervous than he cared to admit. "You ready to head out, sweetheart?" he asked. Lily didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned toward the direction of the K-9 wing, where a deep, restless sound echoed faintly through the corridor. Even softened by walls and distance, Ranger's pacing carried like thunder under the floor. "He's worse today," she whispered. Tom frowned. "Lily, honey, don't get yourself worked up over that dog." "I'm not worked up," she said gently. "He is." Before Tom could respond, the heavy door at the end of the hall pushed open, and Mark Evans stepped through with Dr. Emily Ward beside him. Both looked tired. Mark wore the kind of weariness that clung to a man's shoulders after wrestling a furious 70-pound animal into a reinforced kennel. Emily had the silent, taut expression of someone who'd spent hours studying pain she couldn't fix. When they saw Lily, both paused. "You two still here?" Mark asked. "Just finishing up," Tom said. "We're about to head out." "Should," Emily murmured under her breath. "It's not the safest day to be near the K-9 wing." But Lily took a small half-step forward. "What happened to him?" she asked. "Ranger." Mark rubbed the back of his neck. "He hasn't taken well to isolation," he admitted. "Some dogs settle once they're separated from stimulation. He hasn't?" "He sounds trapped," Lily whispered, "like he's trying to push the room away from him." Emily's brows lifted slightly. "That's an interesting way to put it." "It's what it sounds like." Tom cleared his throat, uneasy. "Sergeant Evans, Dr. Ward, no offense, but Lily doesn't need to hear about this kind of thing." Lily tightened her grip on her cane. "I want to." Emily's eyes softened. She crouched a little, making her voice gentle. "Sweetheart, Ranger he's carrying a lot of hurt. Dogs don't know how to say they're grieving, so they lash out. That's why he's in isolation." Lily swallowed, then asked something none of them expected. "Can I say hello to him?" Tom nearly choked. "Absolutely not." He glanced at Mark for support, but Mark looked conflicted instead of firm. "Lily," he said slowly, "he's not a normal dog. He's unpredictable. Even handlers with protective gear have trouble getting close." "But he wasn't angry at me yesterday," Lily replied softly. "He got quieter when I talked." Emily exchanged a look with Mark. "She's not wrong," she said. "He did change, briefly." "That doesn't mean it's safe," Mark said. "No," Emily agreed, "but it means something." Tom straightened. "We're not putting her near that animal." "We're not talking about near," Emily said calmly. "We're talking about controlled observation, behind double barriers, from a safe distance." Mark stared at her. "You can't be serious." "Mark," she murmured, lowering her voice, "I've reviewed behavioral footage for 18 hours straight. Ranger doesn't soften for anyone, but the moment he heard her voice, his posture changed. Ears forward, growl lowered. That is not nothing." "She's a child," Mark said, weary. "And he's an animal out of time," Emily replied. "We have 3 days before the order goes through. If there's even a sliver of a chance to understand him better, shouldn't we try?" Tom bristled. "Over my dead body am I letting my granddaughter near that dog?" Lily lifted her chin. "Grandpa, I'm not asking to pet him. I just want to say something to him. I think he needs someone to say something." "What could you possibly say?" Tom asked, frustration cracking in his voice. Lily hesitated. She didn't know the answer herself, only that the ache in Ranger's cry yesterday had felt familiar, like a sound from a dream she couldn't quite hold on to. Mark ran a hand down his face. He hated the idea, hated the risk. But he also remembered the look in Ranger's eyes, brief, flickering, not wild, not empty. Recognizing. "All right," he said finally, the words almost painful. "But we do this by the book. 2 barriers. Muzzle option ready. Sedative on standby. And she doesn't go anywhere near the gate." Tom opened his mouth to protest, but Lily's hand slipped into his, small, steady. "Please," she whispered, "I won't be scared." And somehow, in that moment, Tom wasn't scared for her anymore. He was scared for whatever would happen if they said no. Minutes later, they entered the observation room. Thick glass window, steel double-door system, the last place anyone wanted to be when Ranger was in a mood. Mark positioned Lily several feet from the inner barrier. Emily monitored the dog's heart rate from a small screen. A tranquilizer officer stood ready nearby. Mark pressed a button. On the other side, Ranger spun at the sound, launching himself at the bars with a force that rattled the hinges. His teeth clashed against steel. His eyes burned wide and wild. Tom immediately stepped in front of Lily, but she touched his arm. "It's okay," she murmured, and gently moved 1 step sideways so she could face the sound more clearly. Ranger roared, an ugly, guttural explosion that scraped the walls. But Lily didn't move away. She listened, truly listened. She heard the snarl beneath the snarl, the panic, the confusion, the hollow beating of a heart that didn't know where to go anymore. She closed her eyes, took a breath, then whispered a single, trembling word. "Thank you." Everything stopped. Ranger froze mid-lunge, paws braced against the bars, chest heaving. The growl died in his throat. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, his ears shifted forward, his tail lowered, his mouth closed. He took one step back, then another, sitting down as though something heavy had pressed him into the ground. His head lowered. A whine drifted across the room, so soft Mark almost didn't hear it. Lily exhaled. That was all she'd wanted to say. She didn't know why, only that the word felt pulled from somewhere deeper than memory itself. What just happened?" Tom whispered. Emily's voice trembled. Recognition. That wasn't submission. That was emotional recall. Ranger inched forward again, not to attack, but to press his nose through the lowest gap in the bars, close to the place Lily's voice had come from. His body quivered. His breath shook. He wasn't frightening. He was grieving, and for the first time in months, the world did not treat his grief like a threat. Mark stared at Lily, stunned. "How did you do that?" "I didn't," she whispered back. "He did." On the other side of the barrier, Ranger lowered his head until it touched the concrete. And in the quiet that followed, a room full of adults realized that a blind girl had just done what no officer, no trainer, and no specialist had managed to do. She'd reached the dog everyone else had already given up on. "If you want me to begin Chapter 6, just tell me." Mark couldn't sleep that night. He sat alone in the dim glow of his desk lamp, the station long quiet after the day's chaos. The building always felt different after midnight. Air ducts hummed, radiators clicked. The world shrank down to the size of the office he'd claimed as his own over the years, cluttered with case files, old coffee cups, and memories he'd avoided touching for too long. Ranger's stillness in front of Lily replayed in his mind over and over. The dog who had torn through steel like it was cardboard. Sitting. Head bowed. Not from fear, not from dominance, but something far older and deeper. Something Mark hadn't seen since the night Jake Turner died. And Lily's word, just one, had snapped Ranger out of a storm that no command, no tranquilizer, no handler had ever reached through. "Thank you." Mark rubbed his face, leaning back in his chair. "What the hell is happening?" he whispered into the quiet. Emily's voice from earlier still echoed in his ears. Emotional recall, recognition, an anchor. But none of them understood what he should have understood years ago. Something tugged at him, a quiet certainty he had ignored because life in a police station made it too easy to bury the past. Now the past was clawing its way back as if refusing to be forgotten. He slid open the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside was a flash drive he hadn't touched since Turner's funeral, an old black one with a chipped corner. The label had faded, but he could still see Jake's handwriting on the tape, faint as a ghost. K-9, Ranger, field footage. He plugged it in. The computer screen flickered to life with timestamps and thumbnail images from years of calls. Training days, missing persons searches, weather rescues. Some footage from Jake's vest cam, others from Ranger's collar cam. Mark clicked on a date burned forever into his memory. February 12th. Bridge incident. The video began inside the patrol car. Snow hissed against the windshield. Jake's steady voice came through the radio, giving updates as he drove. Ranger sat in the back seat, whining softly, pawing at the metal divider, as if he could smell danger before anyone else could see it. "Easy, boy," Jake said, glancing back. "We'll be there in a minute." They reached the bridge, and the scene unfolded just as Mark remembered, only sharper, crueler in motion. flames licking up from the crushed hood of the sedan. The mother screaming. Jake smashing the window, Ranger forcing his body through broken glass without hesitation. Then came the moment that made Mark's breath catch. Ranger nudged closer to the little girl trapped inside. Her arms reached out blindly, grabbing at the dog's neck. Ranger braced his body, letting her cling to him. Her voice, small and cracked, whispered the same two words through smoke and terror. "Thank you. Thank you." Her sobs shook her whole frame. Ranger didn't flinch, didn't bark, didn't move except to shield her even as embers blew around them. Mark leaned closer, heart pounding. That voice. It was faint under the chaos, but something about the tone, the tremble. It wasn't the kind of thing you forgot, even after all these years. He pulled up the emergency report from that night, scrolling through names until he found the only survivor besides Ranger. Minor female. Age 4, transported to pediatric ICU. Name, Lily Carter. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He whispered to himself, "Oh my God." Lily wasn't just any child. She was that child. The little girl Ranger had pulled from fire. The one whose hands had clung to the dog's fur. The one who had said thank you while Ranger stood between her and death. A shiver rolled through Mark's body. He ran a hand through his hair, overwhelmed by something that felt like revelation and guilt all tangled together. Ranger hadn't responded to Lily because of magic, or luck, or coincidence. He responded because she was the last person he had saved. The last small voice he had heard before Jake died in front of him. The last moment before his world shattered. And she had spoken the same word today that she'd spoken then. Thank you. Mark clicked on another video. This one from Jake's vest cam during the explosion. Smoke bellowed upward. Officers shouted. The camera jolted as the fireball erupted. And then, barely audible, Jake's own last words as he looked toward Ranger. "Take care of her, my hero." Mark froze. Hero. Jake had called Ranger that since his first major find. The nickname was never written in reports, never said in briefings. It was private, personal, something only the two of them knew. Earlier today, Ranger had lowered his head at Lily's voice. Recognition. Was it possible that hearing her, hearing thank you again, had unlocked something deeper than the trauma? Some buried understanding that she was the child he had pulled from the flames before everything went dark? Mark didn't believe in miracles. Not the religious kind, not the sentimental kind, but he believed in loyalty, in memory, in the small ways dogs carried pieces of us long after we were gone. He closed the video, his hands steadying as a new clarity settled over him. If Ranger had any chance at all, any hope of pulling himself out of the wreckage his life had become, it wasn't through handlers or protocols or training manuals. It was through Lily. Because she wasn't just a blind girl who heard his pain. She was the last bright thread still tied to the night Ranger became both a hero and a ghost. Mark shut down the computer and stood slowly. The decision building in his chest wasn't one he'd ever expected to make, but it felt as solid as bedrock. He had to tell Emily. He had to tell Daniels. He had to make them understand that this wasn't just a fluke. This wasn't some strange behavior glitch. Ranger wasn't reacting to her because she was gentle or calm. He was reacting because she was the missing piece of that night, the bridge he'd tried for months to cross alone. As Mark stepped out into the hallway, Ranger let out a low sound from his isolation run, not a snarl, not a threat, but a restless, yearning whine that echoed down the concrete corridor. It was the sound of a memory scratching at the door. And somewhere across town, Lily Carter sat on her bed, fingers tracing the ridges of her Braille storybook, feeling an ache she couldn't name. An ache that had begun the moment she whispered the word, "thank you," into a room full of officers too stunned to speak. Neither of them knew it yet, but the night on the bridge wasn't finished with them. Not by a long shot. By sunrise the next morning, the entire Harbor Point Police Department buzzed with a strange kind of tension. Not the thick dread that had hung over the station since the euthanasia order was signed, but something sharper, more electric. People weren't talking as loudly, but they were listening more closely. Even the officers who pretended not to care found reasons to drift past the K-9 wing, pausing just long enough to catch a glimpse of the dog who had gone still for a blind girl's voice. Chief Daniels felt the shift, too. He felt it before he reached the station, before he stepped out of his truck, before he closed the front door behind him. Something was in the air, something he'd hoped to feel for months, the faintest pull of possibility. The kind he was afraid to touch, but even more afraid to ignore. He found Mark and Dr. Emily Ward already in the briefing room, papers spread across the table, a monitor showing Ranger pacing inside his isolation run. His movements weren't the violent, explosive lunges from earlier in the week. They were tighter now, controlled. Agitated, yes, but beneath the agitation was a strange alertness. "He knows something's changing," Emily murmured. "He's not the only one," Mark replied. Daniels stepped inside and closed the door. "I need you two to tell me why I woke up at 4 a.m. with 4 different voicemails from you." Emily folded her arms. She didn't blink. "Because we need to reevaluate Ranger today." Daniels sighed. "We've reevaluated him 3 times already." "Not like this," Mark said. "We finally understand the trigger and the connection." He told Daniels everything about the footage, the girl on the bridge, the whispered thank you, the last moments of Jake Turner's life, and the final words he'd spoken. Emily filled in the clinical parts, emotional recognition, trauma anchors, associative memory. Daniels didn't interrupt once. He just stared at the screen showing Ranger as he paced slower and slower, as though waiting for someone he couldn't name. When they finished, the chief rubbed his temples. "Damn it," he muttered. "I was really hoping this wouldn't make sense." "It does," Emily said gently. "Too much to ignore." "And you want to do what?" Daniels asked. "A controlled behavior trial," Emily replied. "1 handler, 2 monitors, secure perimeter, and Lily." Daniels' brows shot up. "A child? Absolutely not." "She's not just a child," Mark said. "She's the one who reached him, and she's the one he remembers." Daniels opened his mouth to argue, but Ranger's camera feed showed the dog stop pacing entirely, ears cocking, eyes fixed on the hallway outside the run. The morning shift was starting. Officers were clocking in, but that wasn't what Ranger heard. Footsteps, small ones, measured, familiar. Lily was in the building, and Ranger knew. His tail shifted, not wagging, just loosening, lifting slightly, as though pulled by instinct. His posture changed too, chest rising deeper, the tremor in his muscles easing for the first time in what felt like centuries. Daniels stared at the screen. "Jesus." "We're not asking to put her in his cage," Emily said quietly. "Just into the evaluation space. She stays behind 2 barriers. She doesn't move unless instructed." "And if something goes wrong?" Daniels asked. "That's why you'll have 3 armed officers standing by," Mark replied. "And me. You know I wouldn't risk her if I didn't believe this was the only real shot we've got." Daniels looked at Ranger one more moment, then exhaled deeply. "Fine, but the first sign of danger, any sign, we stop." Minutes later, Lily entered the evaluation room, holding her grandfather's hand. Tom's jaw was tight, his eyes locked on the observation glass as officers checked safety protocols. He didn't argue out loud, he'd done that already. But the fear clung to him like a shadow. "Lily," Dr. Emily said, kneeling beside her, "remember, you don't go past the green line. You speak only when I tell you. You don't put your hand out this time. Understood?" Lily nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "You listening real close, honey?" Tom whispered. "I always do," she said softly. Through the observation window, Ranger stood behind the inner gate, rigid but not wild, tense in a different way. The kind of tension that came from expectancy, not aggression. Mark stepped forward. "Start recording." The room went still. Emily hit the release button for the interior barrier. Ranger didn't lunge. He didn't roar. He took one slow, deliberate step toward the bars. His eyes, those dark, haunted eyes, locked onto the sound of Lily's breath the moment she exhaled. Emily glanced at Lily. "Go ahead," she whispered. "Say something." Lily stepped up to the green line. "Hi, Ranger." A tremor rolled through the dog's body, not panic, not fury. Something softer, breaking open from the inside. Emily tried a test. "Ranger, sit." Ranger didn't move. His gaze didn't shift from Lily. "Ranger, heel." Nothing. Then Lily whispered, "It's okay. You can rest." Ranger lowered himself onto his haunches. The entire room gasped. Mark wrote something down with a shaking hand. Emily pressed the back of her hand to her lips. Tom swayed in place, breath caught somewhere between fear and disbelief. But Emily wasn't done. She signaled to Officer Grant, who struck a metal bar against the floor, an abrupt, sharp clang, the kind of noise that normally sent Ranger into a frenzy. Ranger jerked upright instinctively, but didn't explode. Instead, he pivoted, stepping in front of Lily's direction, body forming a protective arc. Only after she whispered, "You're safe," did he relax again, lowering his head. Emily blinked hard. "My God," she murmured. "He's not reacting to commands. He's reacting to her emotional cues." "That's impossible," Tom whispered. "No," Mark said. "It's Ranger." Emily lifted her clipboard. "Last test, retrieval." She tossed a rubber decoy lightly onto the floor. An officer gave the usual training command. "Ranger, fetch." Ranger didn't budge. But when Lily laughed faintly, just a breath of a sound, warm and light, Ranger trotted forward, picked up the decoy, and carried it to the inner gate, lowering it gently as close to Lily as he could get. Tom staggered back, covering his mouth. Mark whispered, "Holy hell." Chief Daniels, watching from the door, finally spoke. "I've seen miracles in this job," he said, voice rough, "but never one that made this much damn sense." Emily stepped forward. "Chief, this isn't obedience. This is relational healing. She is the key. Without her, we get the Ranger we saw last week. With her, we get—" "Hope," Mark finished. Ranger pressed his nose against the bars again, breathing slowly, calmly, for the first time since Jake's death. Lily reached out, stopping just short of touching the steel, her fingers trembling with something she didn't know how to describe. "You remember me?" she whispered, and Ranger let out a soft sound, half whine, half sigh, that made even the toughest officer in the room look away, swallowing hard. Daniels turned to Emily and Mark. "We're taking this to the city board. Today? If they want to talk about putting down a dog who still has this much left in him, they're going to have to say it to my face." But Lily wasn't listening to them anymore. She was listening to Ranger. And Ranger, after months of thrashing, biting, breaking, was finally listening back. The Harbor Point City Council chambers hadn't been this full in years. Not for budget sessions, not for election debates, not even for the town parade funding vote that had once drawn half the county. This was different. People packed every bench, stood shoulder to shoulder against the walls, spilled into the hallway where latecomers craned their necks to see past the doorframe. Reporters lined the back row. A local news station had set up a live microphone near the podium. Parents with young children murmured anxiously. Retired firefighters sat stiff-backed, arms crossed. Officers in uniform stood quietly near the rear, watching the proceedings with tight jaws. And in the middle of it all, sitting beside her grandfather at a reserved row, was Lily Carter. Her cane rested across her lap. Her fingers traced the handle absently, as if grounding herself. She couldn't see the crowd, but she could feel the weight of every breath in the room, every fear, every hope. Tom sat beside her with his cap held nervously in both hands. He'd never enjoyed being the center of attention, and today he was sitting in the center of a storm without a drop of rain touching him. At the front of the chamber, Chief Daniels faced the city board. The euthanasia form, folded sharply down the middle, sat on the table before him like a guilty secret. Councilman Hayes stood across from him, shoulders squared, expression carved out of ice. Daniels cleared his throat. "Madam Chair, council members, we are here today to reconsider the decision rendered last week regarding K-9 Ranger." "You mean the decision to protect this town from a dangerous animal?" Hayes said loudly, letting his words carry to the back row. "A decision we made based on months of evidence, behavior reports, and specialist recommendations?" Murmurs rippled across the room. Daniels didn't flinch. "We've had new developments." "New developments?" Hayes scoffed. "Chief, with respect, you're letting sentiment cloud." "Enough!" Daniels snapped, and the room fell quiet. He turned slightly, gesturing toward the door where Mark and Dr. Emily Ward were waiting. "Let them speak." Emily approached first. She looked exhausted, yes, but there was something fierce in her eyes, like a woman who'd spent her life studying pain and was finally being given a chance to do something about it. "I have conducted multiple evaluations on K-9 Ranger," she began, "and until yesterday I saw a dog drowning in trauma with no way out." "You said yourself he was a danger," Hayes reminded her. "I said he was afraid," Emily corrected, her tone sharp enough to make him blink. "Fear looks like anger when no one listens to it." A whisper spread through the crowd. She continued, "We performed a controlled behavioral assessment with a variable we didn't previously understand. That variable was Miss Lily Carter." Heads turned toward Lily. She kept her chin lifted, hands calm, though her heart thumped so loudly she wondered if others could hear it. "In Ranger's presence, Lily did not use commands," Emily said. "She didn't use treats. She didn't even touch him. She simply spoke." She paused. "And he responded, not with aggression, but with recognition." Hayes threw his hands up. "Recognition? She's a child, not his handler. Are we basing public safety on feelings?" "No," Emily said. "We're basing it on evidence. Ranger did not react to traditional triggers during the evaluation. Loud noises, movement, unfamiliar trainers. None of these caused the meltdown behaviors we documented before. He deferred to Lily's voice. He steadied his breathing. He even completed tasks when she offered reassurance." "And why," Hayes demanded, "would a supposedly dangerous animal obey a blind child?" Emily exchanged a glance with Mark, swallowing hard. "Because she is tied to the formative trauma that broke him." Mark stepped forward then, carrying a laptop and a small speaker. "I'm not a behaviorist," he said softly, "but I was Ranger's teammate, and I was Jake Turner's friend, and I know what they went through the night Jake died." He played the footage. Not the explosion, Daniels had already barred that from being shown in public, but the part just before, the part with the little girl's voice. The room went silent as that small, shaking, "Thank you," echoed through the speakers. Tom closed his eyes. Lily bowed her head. When the recording ended, Mark clicked to the next image. The hospital intake report with Lily's name on it. Gasps broke out among the listeners. Even the council members sat up straighter. "That girl," Hayes said slowly, "was her?" "Yes," Mark said. "The last person Ranger saved before Jake Turner died. The last living soul Ranger touched before his world ended." A thick hush followed. "He didn't respond to her because she's special," Mark said quietly. "He responded because she's his unfinished story. the one good thing he carried out of that wreck before losing everything else. Emily stepped back up. We aren't arguing to put Ranger back into tactical duty. We aren't asking to make him a risk to officers or citizens. We are proposing a reassignment, something suited to the bond he's already formed. A therapy outreach role, supervised, controlled, monitored by myself and Sergeant Evans. Hayes scoffed again. So your solution is to parade an unstable dog in front of the most vulnerable citizens? Emily didn't yield. No, my solution is to recognize that healing sometimes moves in two directions. Lily grounds Ranger, and Ranger grounds her. All eyes turned to Lily. The chairwoman finally spoke. Miss Carter, do you wish to address the board? Tom stiffened. She doesn't need to. But Lily nodded. I'd like to. He closed his eyes and let her go. She stood slowly, tapping her cane once to feel the space around her. The room quieted. Even Councilman Hayes leaned forward slightly, curiosity softening his scowl. Lily's voice, when she spoke, was small, but steady. He's not angry, she said. He's hurting. The way people hurt when something breaks inside them and they don't know how to fix it. I know that sound because I used to make it too. Tom's breath hitched. Lily continued. When I talked to him, he remembered something. Not me exactly. Not the way people remember faces. He remembered being thanked. He remembered being good. She swallowed. And I think if someone remembers you were good once, you don't want to give up. A few sniffles echoed through the room. She lowered her head. I don't think we should give up on him. Silence settled like snow. Then the chairwoman nodded. We've heard enough. We'll vote now. Hayes raised a hand. I move to proceed with the euthanasia order. His voice rang out boldly, too boldly, but something had changed. The council no longer looked convinced by his confidence. Emily stepped back beside Mark. Tom wrapped his arm around Lily. Daniels exhaled, bracing himself. One by one, the votes came in. No. 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 Yes. No. The last councilwoman paused for a long moment before speaking. She looked at Lily, at the file, at the video, at the chief. No, she said softly. Absolutely not. The motion failed. The euthanasia order was overturned. Gasps and applause broke loose. Someone shouted, "Thank God!" A few officers wiped at their eyes. Even hardened firefighters clapped quietly. Tom hugged Lily tightly. Sweetheart, you did that? She shook her head. He did it. Later that afternoon, Ranger was moved, not to the medical wing, not to isolation, but to a different area entirely. A calm space, a trial program, a beginning. 1 week later, he visited his first children's hospital. Lily walked beside him, hand resting lightly on his harness. Ranger moved slowly, protecting her on instinct, lowering his head each time a child reached out to touch him. People whispered words they hadn't whispered in months. Gentle. Calm. Good boy. And then, one quiet Sunday, Mark drove Lily and Ranger to the bridge, the place where it all began. Snow had melted, guardrails had been repaired, the river ran dark and cold beneath them. Lily stepped forward and placed her hand on Ranger's head. You didn't fail, she whispered. You saved me. Ranger leaned into her touch, letting out a low, contented breath, a sound that was neither grief nor fear. For the first time in a long time, it sounded like peace. When they returned to the station that evening, a new officer, fresh out of academy, saw Ranger lying calmly at Lily's feet and frowned. That the uncontrollable K-9 everyone keeps talking about? Mark glanced at him, then at Lily, then at Ranger's gently thumping tail. No, he said, not anymore. He placed a hand on the dog's back. He was never uncontrollable. He was just waiting for the one person who remembered to say thank you. And with that, Ranger closed his eyes, the weight of months finally lifting, and the station, long haunted by echoes of loss, felt whole again. Chokitim. If this story touched your heart, let me know by dropping a simple 1 in the comments. It may seem small, but it tells me you're right here with us, keeping these stories alive. And if you'd like to hear more true, heartfelt journeys like this one, make sure to subscribe. I'd be honored to have you with me for the next story.